and make sure I've got it recording and get started. Thanks for joining. Still working on the roadmap that I kind of put together. Just a quick update on that. Basically, and thanks for everyone that did give feedback on the new site that I'm working on. Is there any comments, or did anyone not get a chance to check it out?
Me, but I can right now.
Okay. Let's see. I think I can pop it in the chat. I think it's and most of the screens are just mobile at this point. And it was really interesting. Let's see, on render.com, I think that's it. Yeah. So I can share my screen, kind of chat on that. Okay. So still working on the responsive kinks a little bit, but for the most part, I've got the main page pretty good. So that's SVG, and this SVG was probably the biggest pain point with it. So it kind of draws down and it comes to this little graphic here, and you can switch in between the ports. And this SVG is supposed to like draw all the way down to each one of these boxes. So different screen sizes, the way it is now, has different effects. Let's see if I can change the screen size. So I've got it like the best that I can do it. I'm sure others can do a lot better job, but and then the responsive mobile side, once it gets to mobile size, you've got your menu up here, it pops in. It's kind of nice. And then learning Tailwind and SvelteKit at the same time. I learned that I probably should have approached this differently. I probably should have done all the mobile first and then did the desktop. But here's the mobile, and you can switch between the ports, which is pretty cool. And then you've got the FAQ section, testimonials, and a footer. And then I've just stubbed out each of the other pages. So here's the product page that kind of goes on each service in a little bit more detail. And then pricing came out pretty nice for mobile. And then FAQ, it's kind of the same design, but it's got this search and filter functionality. So that would be like you could search for all the questions about product or all the questions about company, etc. And the company page. It's kind of nice having everything as SVG. So I really just went into Figma and grabbed the SVG files and popped them in there. And then all the rest are kind of, well, the getting starting page is worth checking out. So we got to work on each kind of drop down here, but if you get started, if you're just a developer, it would walk you through a getting started 1 through 4 kind of wizard for the developer setup, and then same with startup and agency. So that is what I've got to date.
Where do you want feedback on some stuff? You want it in the channel?
Yeah, there's a, yeah, you can just pop it in the channel. I think that's fine.
Cool. Yeah, I'll do that later on.
There's a website. There's a website channel.
Got it.
Yeah.
Also, when you are getting a little further along and want, or whenever you want an accessibility pass, I have done a hell of a lot of that in the past year and some change. So I got you.
No, that would be awesome. So my current kind of plan is to get the pixel design down on the first phase. So mobile, I feel like I'm in a good spot, and then this week desktop, and try to knock out the responsive desktop, and then hit the copy and a little bit more of the functionality. And then the next piece is, and I'm going back and forth with this, but is one, looking at using maybe Hyper to store some of the JSON docs, to drive some of the content, like the FAQ questions, and some of the developer setup stuff. Basically content that might change, to tweak, and instead of messing with a full CMS, or instead of messing with like Markdown and JSON, because it's kind of structured data. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to be Markdown, most of it, but I don't know. Maybe you guys could get some thought to that and let me know what you think, but yep.
Are you thinking you'd be fetching that dynamically, or would you like as part of your build process, you would like go and fetch that, build out the pages, and then like commit the page changes, or automatically build and
Right.
deploy?
Yeah.
That's the word.
Yeah, I'm kind of open to both approaches, and looking at both, to try to, and I'm trying to think about like when things are changing, is it just as simple to redeploy, repush, or just to grab from the database, since it's it it's not going to get billions of hits, so I'm not not worried about,
Yeah.
I'm really not worried about performance from coming from a CMS, and I can cache it. So I don't know.
Yeah, I'm thinking about like search engine stuff, because I know like Google and them say that they deal with asynchronous stuff, but I'm trying to think of like if the FAQ and other things have like marketing-y stuff in them. That's what I'm trying to think
So
about.
that's so what's really cool about SvelteKit is that SSR is like built in, so every single remote query, it'll always pull the full HTML down. So from an SEO perspective, there's really no difference. It's really more of a preference from, do I want to go and update it and then submit a push to deploy, or do I want it just to, write a record in a database and then it's live, right? So really it's just a preference.
Cool. All right, so what comes after that?
Yeah, so after that, I think is kind of the final review, and like to hit accessibility would be there. So really kind of looking at the calendar, targeting the last week of July or last week of April. Sorry. Is probably that review, and hit. There's so many like Android devices, hit like the web page test and generate like all the screens and start tweaking that. But
Cool.
so some of the stuff is is just like that SVG image float in the background and trying to do that I don't know. I don't know how that's going to get perfect on every single one. If you guys have any any answers to that, if you've dealt with SVGs and as they shrink width wise, they kind of grow height wise, so they kind of extend. That's where I'm struggling. It's like I can make that image that's like 1024. If it shrinks width, it shrinks height, and that's what happens. And I dug into each of the SVG nodes and tried to play with some of the numbers there, but there wasn't a lot of success there.
Yeah, that's a
So
hard one.
yeah.
Are you saying you want, so if you have so say you had a square and the screen got smaller, are you saying you want it to stay proportionally the same, or you want it to only shrink widthwise?
Yeah, so I think the trick is that I'd want it the width to shrink, but the height to stay the same. So that curve with the line down all the buttons, that line kind of stays constant. I'll see. Let me share my screen again. See this line here? So at this size, really about right here. See how that line starts to crawl up?
I mean, is there a way to keep the content above this div, like from pushing the div that contains all the port buttons down?
Yeah, that
Or at least you might have to do some position sort of relative stuff, but it seems like you would want the hyper SVG to be relative to the div that contains all the port buttons. Like it would be contained within that div and then just be positioned within there.
yeah. And that's maybe make this whole section all one section and make it relative, and then position this. That's something to try. This is kind of its own component, but I could probably wrap it around this whole section and try to make this relative to that section. But yeah, that's a good thought.
Yeah,
So
I'm thinking
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So yeah, I'm exploring the DOM. I was talking out loud. Go ahead, Casey. Sorry.
So most of the SVG stuff that I've done in the past has been through D3, so it's not like it's not SVG directly, but I know that I've definitely trying to get SVG layouts inside of CSS layouts can be a little weird, but that viewbox attribute lets you set a height, although that's the one that it just scales it to the exact same proportions regardless. Is that what the issue is?
Right. So if I play around with the view box, all it does is increase the surrounding elements of the image. You know, it just kind of creates extra padding, if you will, either up at the top or the bottom. But yeah. But again, you want to take a look at it, would be great.
So I'm not, I'm not Sarah Sweet Ann, but I've done a lot with SVG. And I know that this is going to be a huge time suck.
Yeah.
If you're looking for a multicolored line, there are ways to do that, like with a before attribute placeholder where you can make a rainbow if you're going for a rainbow. And so you could have the SVG and then have something that is like CSS connecting with that. But there's lots of tricks. That the hard thing with SVG is getting that to like be positioned. I can't quite find where this line is. I haven't dug in long enough, but making something that might be like absolutely positioned, sync up with stuff, and respond to stuff that is not absolutely positioned is difficult, especially with an SVG element.
Yeah. No, and again, it's like I gave it a day and I was like, okay, that's enough. Time to move on. I think I gave it 2 days, to be honest, but
That's on it. That's more patience than I would have had. I would have like given it like an hour and then just been like,
yeah. Well, and it was like, it was like one of those, you go and do something else and then you think of something, you come back to it and you go and do something else. And you just, and then finally I got it to enough to where it's like, okay, that's good enough for right now. So yeah, working through that, I feel like I'm doing a pretty good job. It's Tailwind, like I said, if you start mobile first, I think it just is much easier to deal with. And then SvelteKit is really easy to work with. The only problems that I'm having with SvelteKit are challenges is that Tailwind purges CSS. So as you go through, it uses post CSS to purge it. And if you don't have, if you have your CSS like dynamically specified, then it will kill it because it doesn't know it's there. So that was fun. So basically on my style guide, I've got like a hidden batch of all the class colors that I'm using because I'm basically using those dynamically. But that was interesting. Anything that you use with the post CSS setup, Tailwind will purge that CSS if it can't find it in any of your markup class things. So that's good to know. And then the other thing is the Tailwind build process is incredibly slow. So it just really getting that fast feedback and having to build tailwind on the fly every time there's a change was annoying. And so one of the things that I did on another project was just pull in the tailwind CSS in development mode and not run post CSS on it. And that felt really good. That was a nice feel from just getting stuff from code to presentation. You just I was able to move so much faster. So I know they're working on the compiling of Tailwind, but that was just something that I thought was that could be improved. It's
Yeah,
great.
I know Tailwind just released their like just-in-time mode as part of 2.1, which is supposed to cut down, at least during development, like all of that processing that has to be done to the CSS, especially if you're doing some like some things in the theme that bloat your CSS during development. I think like just-in-time mode's meant to address that, and I think it came out in 2.1, but I haven't gotten a chance to mess around with it at all. But I think it's meant to address some of the problems that you're talking about, Tom.
Yeah, and I don't know if you know, I know I'm running 2.1, but I don't know if SvelteKit turned on just-in-time mode or not. So I'll have to check on that. But anyway, that's sort of where I'm at with that. And then in terms of the rest of the roadmap, one of the things that I wanted to talk about is the API, and thanks, Robert, for looking at one of my iterations on the API, and still kind of iterating on that. Where I am, I feel like I just keep going back and forth. I feel good about the quick dev environment where you get this one connection string to connect, but I'm struggling on building too opinionated of an API and kind of two things: painting ourselves in a corner where people use this a specific way, but I think more so is the fact that I see it creating kind of this thing once it's released that it has to stay up to date, and it could be one of these things that may not be the best solution, but could be, you know, it could be technical debt, I guess. That's and so, you know, I've kind of went back to the thought of, you know, creating a small kind of configuration module, for lack of a better term, and then try to show a picture of that here really quick. But basically just make it easy to connect to Hyper, and then maybe a more basic REST approach, like here's the post command, put command, delete command kind of thing. And the reasoning behind that is more of just trying to build stuff with Hyper, and kind of, you know, each kind of little app that I build kind of takes a different approach and doesn't necessarily have this one size fits all API. So here's some code kind of showing kind of this config module, where basically it would export this URL and this token method, and the URL, well, it would take a hyper connection string, and that hyper connection string is kind of a URL, looks like a URL. It's got like hyper.io : username, password, at, server / account name, right? And it kind of divides that up and then gives you this URL function where you can just give it an ID and it fills out all the stuff, and could take this data and say it's data or cache or storage, etc., but kind of a URL builder, and then a token builder. So then however you want to call this is really up to you. You just got this nice URL builder and token builder. So if I go and look in data access layer, I'm basically, calling the fetch and just calling URL and giving it some data to build my URL. And then I'm just calling token to build the token. So it eliminates that pain point of having to remember, where's my URL that I'm connecting to get data, and I need a JOT, I need a JWT. So it eliminates that. And then it should work whether you use fetch or whether you use Axios or whatever. So that's what I'm experimenting with now. Instead of building like a fully expressive API, just because I think there's going to take a lot of iterations to get that right. What are your thoughts? Are there questions? Did I explain that well enough, or can I answer questions about that kind of approach?
Pretty clear to me. Yeah, and like what the last thing you just showed with the with the headers. So when you're doing like in that example, you're doing a put, like that's what someone end user would be.
Yeah, or
copy.
maybe, maybe an example, like maybe that's in an example. So it's,
Mhm.
An end user can just kind of copy that example. Like here's an example CRUD, so that,
Yep.
they've got the help, but it's not like use hyper.io client, right? It's like just use the hyper, connection string and this little config module, that kind of builds your URL and builds your token. And then if you have a strong opinion again, using Axios, then here's an example of how you use it with Axios. You have an opinion of fetch, here's how you use it with fetch, right? And anything else. And I think what that'll allow me to do is also go to other languages. Like here's your connection string, here's your little config module for Ruby, and then here's an example of how you make a REST call in Ruby. Here's an example of how you make a REST call in Python. And I think that'll,
Yeah.
Again, be much more flexible, but give users a really simple onboarding process, right? It's not so intimidating that they're like, I'm not going to use this. And
Got it.
yeah.
And I think it still leaves the door. If later on down the line we find out that users are really sort of wanting a client, like sort of a client with sort of a for 63 provides, then this sort of, I think, leaves the door open to that. If I'm understanding how this is structured, so it's not so opinionated that it's backing us into a corner, but it's also, I think, clear and with most developers that they could just kind of take it and use it directly.
Exactly. So it's not that I don't want to do a client. It's more of like figuring out when the timing's right to launch the client, right? So if I put something together that, you know, doesn't have a lot of eyeballs on it, and people actually start using it in production code, then all of a sudden we're married to it. And I don't think it's, you know, the way that I'm trying to gauge it is if I put a client together, I should be able to build 5 applications using that client in 1 week, right? 5 little CRUD applications. And what I'm finding is every time I build a little CRUD application, I want to do something different, right? So that kind of tells me that maybe it's a little too premature for an opinionated client. Or maybe I'm the wrong person to take a stab at it, right? So it's one of those two things.
And I sort of mentioned it on a previous meeting, but perhaps an approach is like not building out a fully featured client, but building out little pieces, and then composing those little pieces together to create a client that has just what you want. And then as long as the little pieces implement some sort of API, and then you can compose them together using like a hyper utility. And then that way, all we do is decide what that API is, and then the utility that puts all the little pieces together, and then just leave it up to other people to build the little pieces. But maybe even that's like too opinionated.
Yeah, no, I totally on board with that. And just to share my screen real quick to show one thing that I'm really happy with that little config utility is kind of, you know, if you sign up with dev.hyper63.com with your GitHub, it just gives you this connection string, and you can hit copy. So I'm really happy about that, taking that connection string, copying that into an environment variable, and then I can parse that with a URL and build that URL builder, and also parse it and build a token, which totally eliminates the user from the developer from having to build the URL to connect and to build the token. All they have to do is just get that string in an environment variable, and that reads easy in a tutorial, right? Does that make sense as a first step?
I love that.
Yeah, Tom, I'm late to the party. I apologize, but my thoughts were the URL builder, parser, and the token generator could each be little npm modules.
Yep.
Or am I off base there?
No, that's exactly right. That's what and I think I'm listening to all you guys. It's like, you know, execute on what you know feels good, and then everything else kind of leave in the creative space for it to fall when it's ready to fall.
Like it should be obvious what you should be building at any one given time.
I mean, I think the URL approach is fine, and I also think it sort of adheres to just sort of, and referencing like clean architecture. He just says good architecture lets you defer making decisions on things. So if we don't know, if it's not clear what we think a client should do or what it looks like, then let's just make decisions now that prevent us from having to make that decision now.
Yep.
And just kick it down the road.
Cool.
And the URL connection string seems like a pretty good solution to me. That doesn't back us into any corners to support something that a team could like take to production.
Exactly. So that way, if I write like 2 tutorials in the next few weeks, I don't have to worry about those tutorials being dead in 2 months, right? They'll still be usable. So. Cool. Thanks for thinking through that with me, because it's one of those things. It's like I see what some other folks are doing some really nice APIs, and it's very enticing. But then, you narrow yourself down to very specific use cases, and not everybody is building a blog, or not everyone's building Y Combinator Hacker News. It's just more than likely more people are building something that's a little bit more unique. So Casey, from someone that's got a pulse on beginners, what are your thoughts about that?
Whenever I see something like that, I'm if it ends up being clean and useful long term, I'm all about it. But I'm always, my first direction that I always go is more in the, I want more control myself. Give me more control over I'm giving someone else control. Now, it obviously depends on the specific scenario, both in terms of like the knowledge that you have about the tool that you're using and how well the tool that you're using is set up. But I generally tend to like more control over something myself. That being said, there are definitely times where a well-written tool makes things way, way better. And I'm very glad that I didn't start with my own control, because I wouldn't have been able to think through all of the use cases just from scratch. So, I mean, from that perspective, I think if this is something that will be sort of a well-developed and maintained tool, I can't really think of any particular downsides of it, other than, I don't get to type the URL myself and create my own token. Although I guess you still probably could at some point.
Right. Yeah. You absolutely could, and I definitely can provide instructions on how to do that in a way that people feel empowered to do that. It really, my thinking is that building guides and tutorials, in my opinion, is try to reduce the boilerplate that doesn't really provide value, so that you spend as much time focused on the meat that the person is interested in, and having to enter in 4 or 5 environment variables and do a JWT sign, or think about concatenating URL and risk making a mistake. those are a couple of things that can frustrate folks, right? Their URL looks right to them, but it's not working. So
Do you mind if I just drop some kind of like tangential thoughts real quick?
sure.
Yeah, because I'm kind of feeding off what Casey was saying about control. And this kind of goes for like, I guess any decision making you're doing when it comes to I guess it kind of boils down to like convention and versus the configuration argument that you'd see in Rails and other things. And as someone who's been a beginner in a lot of things, like moving into the Haskell world, moving into the Rust world, like moving into the Elixir world, moving back into the Ruby world, and being on different teams or like just collaborating with different groups of people that were at a similar level to me. The places where it's like, do whatever you want, always ended up being harder experiences unless there was either something built into the tool that gave you that convention. So think Rails and Phoenix, or like IHP with Haskell, which is a new thing. Or look at it from like the Node.js outside of Express world, where it's kind of like, do whatever you want. I still work on some projects that are like, you don't know where anything is, you'll never find it, and it's really hard to work with. And because like a lot of different people over time had like their own ideas about how to do something. And so I think maybe that sweet spot for you in going forward with making things and figuring out the client and stuff is like, if you're not sure exactly what the conventions should be for all the use cases, for like, this is my big old demographic of user types. If you're not sure about that, maybe like you're doing already, here, I'm not going to constrict you, but here's the recommended way to do it.
Yeah.
Feels like that's the sweet spot. And I think you've hit that. So I'm really not really saying much other than like, as we go forward in the future too, think about how, think about if you've got a deal with a code school where it's like, hey, code school people get this many, hyper apps or hours or however you do pricing stuff in the future, and then you've got 20 people in a code school playing around with it. If they're all doing it differently, it's going to be hard.
Yeah, no, I hear you and totally get that point. I think the approach that I'm attempting to take is, if from now until July, if I can get 3 or 4 different kind of use case apps, all using Hyper, and then refactor them, into a common kind of data access layer, right? A common data access layer, and say, here is the opinionated way, however that turns, whether it turns into a client or whatever. And here's 5 different app use cases to show how you would use that data access layer. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. I'm just kind of like philosophical musing right now. It doesn't, but yeah, no, that makes total sense. Like, kick it down the road, because like you said, you don't want to be making guides and then all of a sudden be like, oh, huge breaking change, Angular 1 to 2 level change.
Yeah.
And lose a bunch of people and have to go back and do extra work to update the old guides.
Yeah. And again, there's always going to be some of that, but I feel like, if you put a client out there and start to put that in, it's just those opinions, those decisions you made, like you said, they become pretty sticky pretty quick.
Yeah, that also, I just got another little quick thing. Have you thought of, I don't know if you're doing this, but just when you do more guides and stuff, like videos and blog posts, whatever, are you tagging any kind of like hyper version kind of stuff to make it easier? Like when you do a breaking change in the future, you can know, like, you know, which ones to go back and put a note on, like this is for version this.
Yeah. No, that's
yeah.
a great point. I'm
That's a great
not
idea.
tagging hyperversions.
Because you don't know how developer, what getting started guide they're gonna hit first. They could get an old deprecated one and be like, what the heck?
Exactly. I was just, yeah, everything we're talking about, it's like, what do you do there? Manually go back and look through? That would suck.
One of
Yeah,
the,
so I've got my learn Svelte one, and I think I've got to go back and, you know, kind of change that to Svelte kit, and that's not hyper, but it's kind of the same principle. If you've got a bunch of these guides, and you know, in the requirements section, it takes this version of hyper, right, and then tag that so that you can easily find them. And
or you bind them together into kit version numbers, like, you know, here's your helper code and tutorials and videos for HyperKit 1. And HyperKit 1 deals with this versions of Hyper.
Yep.
And this was on this date. You probably want HyperKit, the latest HyperKit, with a link to the latest, you know.
Yep.
And that way someone can get on to the right point in time. Yeah, so with the web and a developer ecosystem, it's like a facet of a diamond with many different faces, right? Like a diamond's cut with many different faces, and you can look into the diamond from any one of those facets or angles, and it's still the same diamond, but it's a different perspective. So whether you're coming at the truth of what the thing is from the frequently asked questions guide, or the getting started guide, or the errors, or the Swagger technical reference, or the source code, it's all a window into the same thing. So yeah, you got to make sure they're not looking into an old window into an old thing.
Yeah.
Or if they do, how to get back on the new thing, if that makes sense. That way, that gives you freedom to iterate and say, well, screw HyperKit 2, it sucks. We're going to move to HyperKit 3. Buy HyperKit 2. So
Yep.
let you move on.
Cool. All those are super great thoughts, and helps me, you know, really move forward. So now I don't have to be blocked. Anything else? Is there anything that you guys had for questions? I'm hoping to make an announcement, a big announcement, any day this week. And you know, move into hyper.io in the next month, and then hopefully be ready to at least get some developers on the system probably by the end of May. That's kind of the target now.
Cool. I'm gonna give you, I think tonight I got a little time, so I'm gonna give you a review on that dev website .onrender and get that to you. And I'll include some ally stuff just so
Okay.
so you're aware, but not like hardcore.
No, that's awesome.
Cool. That's an exciting timeline.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the core stuff is done. It's just really getting getting the website and getting the copy and getting some guides together. So just
Yeah, and that
just the
guides. Oh, go ahead.
no, it's just like the 10%, you know, the 90% done, and then the 10% that takes forever.
but that's the stuff that's like a make or break, you know, because if it's real like bootleg feeling, it's going to be the most like the people who are willing to go to the edge and like dig the deepest, and then but then you like get classed as like a niche thing instead of something that's for the mainstream.
Right.
So like with the website, like this stuff looks fabulous, and so if your docs go along with that and really like that, all that effort, you know, like that 10% of the stuff is really sucking up a lot of time, but you know, if that stuff hits the mark, like you're in there.
No, I hear you. Yeah, and it's getting the copyright and getting focus on making sure things are clear and easy to understand. Cool. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Is there any other thoughts before we hang up? I know we're right at time, so.
No, I'm good. Good job.
I got a new logo, so hopefully I'll get some new swag in the store with the new logo the next few weeks. Send you
Oh,
guys some
snap.
stuff.
Yeah.
The Hyper 63 will be an authentic
OG.
yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like OG merch.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, Tom, you've been getting a lot of work done, so and really great job on all of this.
Thanks.
Yeah, you
I
pump it out. It's pretty cool.
really appreciate that. Yeah, and just trying to get there. So thanks for all your help and guidance, and yeah, see you in a couple weeks or sooner. Thanks.
Cool. See ya.
See you
Yeah,
guys.
everyone.